here. Speaking on F&A rate agreement process, otherwise known as IDCs. Ooh. So we have our next slide here with our acknowledgement statement. And without further ado.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining Jenny and I in a very brief conversation about the F&A rate proposal and negotiation process. So my name is Sarah Kern. I have been doing post-award Central Research Administration at Arizona State University since 2008, and I love it. I've had lots of different roles. Currently, I'm a sponsored project agent, which is a technical role right now. And I had the amazing opportunity to submit my first F&A rate proposal in August. So woohoo, I'm still standing. And then this is my wonderful colleague, Jenny.
Let's see. Okay, can anybody hear me?
Yes. Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. My name is Jenny Smolnik. I am a senior manager with the Maximus Higher Education practice. But prior to working with Maximus over the last couple of years, I worked with Arizona State University for 15 years, most of that time in sponsored projects, and got to work with a lot of the people who are here at this conference. So thanks for having me to talk with you today.
Okay, so this is our agenda that we'll be going through introductions. We'll be talking a lot about the technical details of the rate proposal at as high a level as we can in 15, 20 minutes, but also the equally important parts of building out your network to be able to appropriately handle an F&A rate proposal.
All right, so getting started, just want to talk generally about what F&A is, or indirect costs. So institutions that are doing research, of course, have the opportunity of calculating an F&A rate for their institution. And what that rate actually represents is your institution's annual investment in supporting research at your institution. So the federal government has also acknowledged, especially for awards where they are supporting that research directly, where they're the ones who are sponsoring the funding, that there are a lot of different ways that your institution has already invested. And these look like your capital assets, your facilities, and infrastructure across your campus, as well as capital equipment. And you have libraries that are supporting all of your faculty and students. You have utilities, all kinds of IT services and information safety that is being done at your campus. Lots of different areas where your university is currently covering costs. So when you have a sponsor that now wants you to do work for them on a project, it is justified that you should be able to ask for some reimbursement of that investment that your institution has already made. And that's what the indirect cost rate proposal is for. So if you calculate that you should have 50% as your F&A rate, that means that as an institution, for every direct dollar that is budgeted on your research projects, you are already investing 50 cents every year on each of those dollars that you're spending directly in indirect costs, personnel, facilities, capital equipment, all of those things.
All right, I'm clicking, but to no avail. I'm going to try again. Oh, something exciting's happening. Might have to do this old school with a mouse. Oh, there's two mice happening here. Hold, please. This is a lot of what your experience with the F&A rate proposal process will be like. Lots of stop and go. You didn't know it was going to be so interactive.
Yeah, and can we turn the camera on in the room too so that we can see you, Sarah?
Like the camera might not be on there. Yes. Thank you, Jenny, for letting us know that wasn't working. Can I ask how many people in the room and then online, if you're able to raise your hand, how many people have been involved in an F&A rate proposal at your institution? I see one. Ooh. I don't know if I see some online too.
Yeah, a few people.
That's great. If we can get it to double by the end of today, we'll have done our job.
Yeah, it's definitely a big project that incorporates people from all across your institution. So if you get to participate in it, it's a great opportunity to connect with people from all over. How are the slides going?
The thing needs to be set. If it's not, it's glitching. Oh, I think so because the keyboard's not working.
And I'm fine being the talking head for the folks on Zoom if we're not able to make that work. I heard from the beginning of the conference that timing is very important, and I really appreciate that because I'm the type of person when like if someone's a few minutes late in their presentation, I'm walking out because I need snacks. So we're done at 2 today, no matter what.
And we can talk fast.
All right, so while they're working this out, we've got a good. Hi. So we're going to go over a very brief overview of the F&A rate proposal cycle. So typically, with institutions like ours, our rates are effective for 3 to 5 years. We're utilizing what's called predetermined rates. So instead of having rates that are negotiated every year, they are predetermined for a set amount of time. And then during that final negotiation to set up your rate, it is also determined what your next base year is going to be. And your base year is the fiscal year sometime in the future, so usually 2 to 4 years in the future, that you will use the financial data for that particular year to come up with your rate proposal. So that's your base year there. You will also, during that base year, especially for most of us here, you will be conducting a space survey. And then after that entire process, you will then prepare and submit the rate proposal to your cognizant agency. And then there is a process of negotiating your rates, quotations very much intended. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, I'm going to try to advance the slides. Yay, thank you very much.
Perfect. Okay, so when you're looking at an F&A rate proposal for your institution, there are 2 different ways that schools can submit those proposals. One is called a short form and the other is a long form. And it really is dependent on how much federal funding your institution is receiving on an annual basis. If it's below $10 million annually, then the government requires a limited data set to prepare the numbers for putting together your F&A rate. And they require that you do just a single rate for any and all sponsored projects and apply that rate on all projects. So the difference for the long form, of course, is that you are receiving more than 10 million in federal funds each year. And for NAU, ASU, and the U of A, all 3 of those institutions submit long form proposals.
Lucky us.
Yeah. And so they are, when they're preparing that, they are doing a space inventory and a survey where they functionalize their research intensive space. They're going to be calculating multiple rates for different types of sponsored activities at their institution. And there's a multiplicity of data sets that they have to prepare in support of that proposal as they're putting it together. So some of the ways that we end up breaking that data down, and again, Sarah indicated that we are doing this as a cost study across an entire fiscal year. So you're looking at all of the university costs that are occurring during what is considered your base year for your proposal and putting those into different cost buckets, what we call cost pools. And the reason for that is that, again, as an institution, you are reporting annually on your financials, all of your expenditures, and those financial reports are published, made public. But when it comes to the F&A proposal, the federal government looks at some of your expenses a little bit differently. So the use of cost pools is an attempt to take your expenses as they're reported in your financials and put them into these buckets as the federal government dictates. And so when we're looking at all of those costs across an entire year, we put them into general facilities and administrative cost pools. And the facilities areas include, again, your building, equipment, and depreciation, depreciation on other capital assets, interest expense on your facilities that have been financed, operations and maintenance costs, and your library. And then you have all your different levels of administrative support. So those are your general components that are going into your F&A rate. And those are set up in ratio to your direct costs for your projects, for your instruction base, any sponsored instruction, organized research, other sponsored activities. And then the government also says you have to create this category called OIA, other institutional activities. And anything that isn't included in your sponsored activities or these types of activities as they've defined them kind of goes in that area. And it includes a lot of your university costs, but this is a very general categorization of how we take these costs across a year and put them into each of these buckets to calculate your rate.
So besides all of the financial and data analysis that is involved in the F&A rate proposal, to pull one off successfully, it's ultimately about connections. So we provided on this slide some of the various areas that you would be working with on an F&A rate proposal. And a couple of the items I want to call out in particular is with financial services. So at ASU, it is our central research office that owns the F&A rate proposal process, but we have to work very closely with financial services. So the cost study that happens over the course of your base year is based on your financial statements for that year. And that's important because your financial statements get audited each year. So when the feds eventually look at your rate proposal, they're not having to go back and determine the accuracy level of your financial statements. That's already been done. So your financial statements are your best friend. But for me, when and my colleagues, when it was fiscal year 2022, we had over $3.1 billion worth of transactions in fiscal year 22 that we needed to be able to categorize. And so trying to get from the F&A rate proposal and from the financial statements and backtrack them all the way to the actual individual transactions in our financial systems, there was just no way that we were going to do that on our own. So thankfully, we've been building relationships on lots of other projects with financial services. So they really cared about helping us when we asked them. And we had so many meetings to talk about the data structure and how data flows in the financial statements. So we have similar with capital assets. There's a lot of detail related to buildings and equipment that you need that are not present in the financial statements, but that you need to be able to successfully pull off an F&A rate proposal. And then a team that you build, you should really be considering having project managers. Just because someone is a grant data expert doesn't mean that they're great at running a project and making sure that everyone's doing what they need to be doing. Someone who's very strong with communications, and then also working with potentially consultants. So ASU, every few years, we go through an exercise to say, hey, are we ready to just handle the rate proposal negotiations process on our own? And up to this point, it's been no. So we work with Maximus, who Jenny is currently with. We've worked with them for several years, and in any 1 to 5 year cycle, ASUs may be doing one F&A rate proposal, but a consulting company has potentially done 50 in that same year. So their expertise and seeing the overall lay of the land and like what's currently happening is just always going to be more current. And then finally, commenting on role redundancy is extremely important because this project is usually going to be a couple years long. And so you can't depend on Sarah Kern to be there for the entire process. So you need multiple people involved so that as people have to roll on and off the project, you don't lose all of the institutional knowledge that you're gaining.
Okay, so one of the things that we had mentioned earlier as part of this long form process is a space survey. And the space survey really drives a lot within the calculation. So the federal government requires first that an institution does an inventory of their space. So that is a confirmation of the room number, the room type, of course, the building that the room is in, but mostly which department is assigned to use that space, and along with square footage detail, who's actually using the space, who's using those labs. And then the next piece after that, and like I was saying, this is really what drives the calculation for the rate proposal, is a space survey, where you're looking at the people in the space and then showing that detail that relates to their payroll and the activities that they're doing in that space. So this is based mostly on research room types. That's where you're focusing because that's where most of your research activity is going to happen. And then you take a look at how much time those people are spending in those rooms. You're making sure that there's a connection to those projects through payroll records, which is really how the government knows that you are connecting your data accurately. And then overall, you're doing a calculation kind of based on averages for how much people are spending time there and what projects they're performing to create a utilization picture for that room. What percentage is going to research activities versus instruction versus other types of activities.
And space surveys can be a little more intimidating post-pandemic of how do you handle that with all of the hybrid work schedules. And so for us, we just assumed that if that people were in the office doing the work, just because FY22 was still within the still within the pandemic era.
Yeah, and it's very time intensive working on that. So you get a lot of people involved. So once you have put your proposal together, there's a long period that you may have to wait before you can actually negotiate your rate agreement with the federal government. And the pictures that I have here kind of have multiple meanings. The first one being that when you are negotiating with the federal government, a lot of times it can feel like you're kind of pulling against an immovable object. And in a way, it's their job to be exactly that, because the federal government is paying for these overhead costs that we are applying for through this proposal process with tax dollars, essentially. They want to make sure that that public investment is being well spent and well protected. And so it's their job to make sure that they are not giving more of the federal government's money than they need to. And so while you may have a very justifiable proposal that says specifically how our institution is investing these funds, the government is still going to say, you know, we're going to poke holes in your proposal, but at the end of the day, this is how much we're able to give. And so with that in mind, you know, the finishing of the proposal is an opportunity to celebrate, to say, this is great. We have a justifiable proposal, really clean. We really trust our data that we're giving over to the federal government. But when it comes to the negotiation process, it can feel like all of those numbers you put together are just out the window, because what you calculated for your university's investment is not necessarily at the end of the day what the federal government is going to give you, unfortunately.
And that pains my poor little accountant heart. So some additional things that are coming down the pipeline that are going to impact our institutions is that uniform guidance is being updated again, which is actually really positive. We should expect to see the new guidelines published in October, but the feds have released a pre-production guide that includes 200 initial pages of commentary. I've not worked my way through all of them yet, but I'm getting there. And then the remainder of the updates. So I double checked the pre-production that just guide that just got released earlier this month. So the subaward base that you can apply FNA rate, your FNA rate to, is going to be increasing from 25 to 50,000. That's a really huge deal. The disclosure statement, our DS2, is no longer required. We've been 99% done with our DS2 statement for the last 7 months, but we're like, we're going to wait to see what the change is going to be. So I don't have to submit that. I'm so excited. And then there's a allowable capital threshold increase from 5,000 to 10,000 that will not override what the thresholds that your own institution or state is setting. So I have not finished reading the updated guidance because it just got released. But originally back in the fall, it was anticipated that to uptake these changes, institutions would need to include them in proposed and negotiated FNA rates. So my activity over this month is to figure out, do we need to submit a revised FNA rate proposal? Because we submitted in August and we haven't heard back anything yet. So we'll see how that goes.
And there's a chance with that, just as a quick note, that if you are waiting for a response from federal negotiators on your pending rate proposals, they may ask you for some additional data before you're actually able to negotiate. So just bear in mind with those uniform guidance changes, if you're updating your accounting practices and would make updates to your DS2, that they're going to want to see rates negotiated in line with that.
So some final thoughts on perspective, because as you know, Jenny identified, for those of you who get embedded in the FNA rate proposal, you finish it, you submit it. This is my only proposal I've read, and I was in the middle of this 410-page proposal, and I'm like, I hate this. This is awful. I'm gonna have to read it again. I was like, wait, this is what my pre-award colleagues do all the time. I have chosen the right side of the coin to be on. I only have to read one proposal every 5 years, which is great. So the investment in the university of time and money and lots of headaches in this process, even if you don't get the rate that you can justify, is you have now a very good assessment of the overhead costs that are required to run your sponsor project portfolio. And you become the person that everyone starts coming to say, hey, what happens if I make this group a recharge center? Or what happens if we switch this over onto this side? What is the impact going to be? You can actually have those types of conversations. It is very helpful in better understanding federal requirements, because you have to go through all of your transactions and, take out the items that were unallowable. And for a lot of us, especially on the post-award side, day to day, there's some elements that we just never see as being unallowable because they don't pop up on a regular basis. And then just to remember that while there's so much of the negotiation process we don't control, we are able to control of how effective is our space utilization. How do we determine when and how much are we going to waive FNA at our institutions? So we work so hard to negotiate an FNA rate agreement, but then we just turn right around and are like, nope, we don't need to charge FNA on all of these projects. We have some control over that. And then how much FNA revenue is reinvested into the institution through departments or PI mechanisms. So we'll have some resources that you can get into the PowerPoint deck, uniform guidance, FNA rate determinations, and then our 3 institutions specific FNA rate guidance. And with that, we have 2.5 minutes available for questions.
There's a quick question back here. 2 questions back here in the back.
All right. The first one is, why is there such a gap of what the feds will pay versus our actual? They say, example, 77% versus 57%.
Yes. Okay. So there's many different reasons, but 2 that I would say is the first is that the feds have had a decades-long policy of they will not, for your facilities administrative rate, they will not give you more than 26% for your administrative rate. Their justification is they don't want to be paying for inefficiencies. And so that's a big portion of what that piece is. And then the other reason is that the feds are trying to do their best to steward taxpayer dollars. And so they will go through with a fine tooth comb through your rate proposal and then sometimes just randomly chop stuff off to be like, we don't like this. We don't feel confident that you pulled the data correctly. We're going to assume a certain amount of human error and chop it off. So there's a couple reasons there. Okay.
A lot of questions, and I think that probably the best way to do it would be to get a hold of you online, perhaps. But we're about time. We're at about time now. So
Yeah, we can take one more.
one more question.
Yeah.
Run along. Phil Donahue.
Where do the funds come from in the university that covers this difference? So
That is such a great question.
Well, so like we said, when you're calculating this, this is a representation of an investment that your university has already made. And so your rate proposal is really asking your sponsors to recoup some of that reinvestment that is already supporting the research projects that they're funding. So when you're looking at the difference, it's just something that your university is already paying. And as public institutions, that means that is mostly coming from taxpayer dollars and or tuition. But yeah, there are a variety of funding sources that are supporting that difference.
All right. Thank you very much, Jenny, for doing a hybrid session with me. Thanks to all of you. We really appreciate your time.